You thought level 9 was scary with the decimals. What if there's a fraction? Or worse, lots of fractions in the equation. Get ready to panic some more. Make this the title of the next page in your math notebook. When you have done so, mark your page. Calm down. Take a deep breath. Believe in yourself. And let's give it a try. All right, so if there's going to be fractions in these equations, let me remind you of your fraction operations that you learned in 4th and 5th and 6th grade, as these are going to be necessary. So I'll just pick, like, I don't know, some basic fractions, like maybe a 1/6 and 3/4 or something. So I'm going to add those together, 1/6 plus 1/4, or subtract them, 3/4 rather. 3/4, or let's even we'll go negative, that's fine. 1/6 minus 3/4. I'm going to do either of those. When you add and subtract, they have their own set of rules. You can't add or subtract fractions unless they have the same denominator, which these do not. So in order to add or subtract these, we'd have to change them into fractions that do have the same denominator. In this case, I think I could change them both into fractions with a denominator of 12. Right, and so here 1/6, since 6 is multiplied by 2 to get that denominator, we would also multiply the numerator by 2, and that would be 2/12. On this one, 4 times 3 made 12, so we would do 3 times 3. On the numerator, that makes 9. Add those together, you get 11/12. You do not get 1 plus 3 is 4, 6 plus 4 is 10. You do not get that. That's not how you do it. Subtracting the same way, 1/6 times 2, so numerator times 2, minus 3, 4 times 3 is 12, so 3 times 3 is 9. And then we keep that denominator of 12, and we just subtract the numerators. So 2 minus 9 would be -7/12. So adding and subtracting fractions, you find the same denominator, keep that denominator, and deal with the numerators. Multiplying fractions is the easiest operation. That thing I X'd out over here, you don't just add the numerators, add the denominators. Multiplying, you actually do that. All you have to do to multiply two fractions, multiply their numerators, 3, multiply their denominators, 24, and you're done. Only with multiplying do you get to do that, but that's the fastest one. Dividing 1/6 divided by 3/4. The way we do that is you keep the first fraction, and instead of dividing it by 3/4, you multiply it by the what we call reciprocal of 3/4, which is like flipping the fraction over. So instead of dividing by 3/4, I'm going to multiply by 4/3, and that'll give me the same thing. And the reason I like to do that is multiplying is easy. Multiplying is the easy operation, so this is a short, quick way to do that. And then 1 times 4 is 4, 6 times 3 is 18. So if you know how to do those three things, equations with fractions in them aren't difficult. They just look like they would be. So when we look at an equation like this to solve and figure out x, if you're able to deal with your fractions without panicking, they're not really that bad. So I'm going to start with my inverse operation strategy. Much like decimals, the visual strategy is difficult if not impossible, because when I start looking at drawing this, this is real hard to draw. Some of you may have some creative tips and tricks to use the visual strategy where you don't actually draw everything that's here, but you use this to keep track of it. That may work. But for now, let me start with inverse operation, because if you're able to do this without panicking, it isn't, like I said, so bad. So if I write out my equation here, 3/5 x plus 1/4 equals -1/2. So if I just calm down for a minute and look at this, this is a normal two-step, done a million times things. If I hadn't done the fractions, if the fractions weren't there to scare me, I would look at this and say, well, what's happening to x? Two things. It's being multiplied by 3/5. The inverse of that is dividing by 3/5. That's not, I can figure that out. Also has 1/4 being added. The inverse of that is subtracting 1/4. That's not too bad either. Nothing too scary so far. it looks like just my normal old reverse gems two-step deal. Not a problem. So as I go here, I'm going to deal with this add and subtract one first. I'm going to start here. And so since x has a fourth being added to it, I'm going to subtract a fourth from both sides. Like that. As always, I did this to make 0 on purpose, and I'll have 3/5 x over here. And I have to figure this out. This one on the right I've got to figure out. I don't like to try to add or subtract or whatever I'm doing here up and down. So what I actually do with these fraction problems is I stop and say, okay, right now I need to figure out -1/2 minus a fourth, and I write it off to the side where I can deal with it side to side. It's scary enough to deal with fractions in like this. This is very, just a lot to look at and easy to make a mistake. So when I look at this, don't panic. Just think through what to do. First thing I would do is not subtract. I would go ahead and add the opposite. And I need to -1/2 plus -1/4. I need them to have the same denominator to add them. The easiest one I think is 4. This is already -1/4. This -1/2 is -2/4. And when I add those together, I would get -3/4. Not that bad. But you've just got to not panic. Remember your rules for fractions. And again, I like to write this out over here because I think this makes it even harder trying to figure out what to do there. You may not. If you're comfortable with fractions, it may not be any worse, is to me. So now we're here, last step. So I've done this. I've done my S. Next we go up to multiply and divide. X is being multiplied by 3/5. Don't panic. The inverse of that, like always, is to divide by the same thing. Divide by 3/5. Now again, I don't know how to do this. I don't like seeing it like that. So I'm just not going to write it like that. I'm going to, oops, sorry about that. I'm going to take a minute and I'm just going to rewrite what I need to figure out here off to the side. I'm almost done. These are going to make 1. That's why we did it. Whatever this division equals, that's going to be my answer. So I'm just going to write it off to the side again. I'm going to go way over here and just say, okay, what I'm trying to figure out is -3/4 divided by +3/5. Okay, so first things first, when I divide fractions, I've got to remember my rule. If you got to look up your rule, go ahead and look it up. Anything like that is fine. But what I'm going to end up doing is instead of dividing by 3/5, I'm going to end up multiplying by the reciprocal of 3/5. And now this isn't actually bad. As long as I remember to do that, multiplying these two fractions is a breeze. Negative times positive is negative. And then 3 times 5 is 15. 4 times 3 is 12. This is good enough. If you don't like improper fractions, you're welcome to change that into -1 and 3/12. Don't have to, but you can. And if you even are good at simplifying your fractions, you'd be welcome to even change that into -1 and 1/4. But any of these are fine. As long as you don't panic when you see your fraction rules, they're not different than any other equation. You've just got to be able to look at a fraction, take a deep breath, and say, okay, I know how to add them. I know how to multiply them. I know how to divide them. If I don't, I'll look it up because I've had teachers tell me how to do this for years. I just have to remind myself of how to deal with the fractions, and it's okay. All right, let's try one together. I'm not going to do the visual strategy. Like I said, I don't know how to draw this a part of an X. If you're kind of creative and you want to come up with a way to do this with the visual strategy, I think it can work. In a later fractions video in the proficient level, I'm going to show you that sometimes I can draw fraction problems. It just depends on the situation. This one I think is more trouble than it's worth, as is going to be the next one. So let's do this one together. Go ahead and pause, write it down. I don't know why my strategies aren't there. Common sense, visual, inverse up. And unpause when you are ready to work it out. Okay. I definitely think this would be too hard to common sense. I'm even going to write visual, not recommended. But if you're really creative or you do the visual strategy a little differently than I do, it might work fine. I do think it's possible, depending on how you operate with that strategy, to do it. All right, so inverse ops where I'm going to go. -1/8 x minus 2/3 is equal to 1/6. Let's go ahead before we even start. There's enough scary things in there. Let's not subtract. Let's just go ahead and add the opposite, get that out of the way off the bat. Okay, so same 2 steps I always do. We've got to deal with this, then we've got to deal with this. It's no different than ever. We just need to do reverse gems like we always do and just not panic when we see the fractions. So first one's here. I've got a -2/3. If I want that gone, I get that gone with a +2/3. Those will cancel out and make 0. And I've just got to figure out how to do it over here. What I like to do is write it off to the side. I don't try to deal with it this way. I'm going to come way off to the side and just do some side work and say I've got to figure out 1/6 plus 2/3. Give yourself space, write it the way you like to write it, make it nice and neat, take all the scariness away from it. Whatever you need to do to make it easy to deal with, okay? Or that's like all we're doing. So I need a common denominator. I think the easiest one is 6. This one's already 6. 2/3 is equivalent to 4/6. Those are equivalent fractions and easy enough to add. They make 5/6. So now I'm down to -1/8 x is equal to 5/6. Halfway home. One more fraction to deal with. X is being multiplied by -1/8. The inverse of that is to divide by -1/8 on both sides. And again, I don't know what that is. And I'm going to go off to the side where I've got space to figure it out. 5/6 divided by -1/8. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Remember your division fraction rules. The way you divide 2 fractions is you multiply instead of divide by the reciprocal, means like the flipped over version of the second fraction. Okay, so far so good. Now I've got to remember my multiply fractions rule. That's the easy one where you just multiply across. So in this case, 5/6 is positive, -8/1 is negative, so I'm going to have a negative outcome. Negative times positive is negative. 5 times 8 is 40, and 6 times 1 is 6. I'm going to leave it like that. I'm perfectly fine with improper fractions. If you don't like them, 6 times 6 would be 36, and there'd be 4 more to make 40. You could rewrite it as -6 and 4/6 or -6 and 2/3. All fine answers, all perfectly fine. So we're back over here. X was equal to -46. That's it. If you know your fraction rules, not so bad. If you don't, here's what I would do. I went back on the very first slide and gave you a quick reminder of how to do them. If you don't remember your fraction rules, go back to this page, pause here, write this down. Give yourself an example. You've seen this many times in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. Go ahead and write it down. Make a little cheat sheet so that next time you see fractions and you want to panic, you do know how to do them. Remind yourself how to add and subtract them, multiply and divide them, write down your rules. If you need to write, common denominator here. If you need to just say multiply across here. And if you need to say something like multiply by reciprocal here, whatever you need to remember these, make yourself a cheat sheet that you can just pull out when there's a fraction issue and you can solve them. If you know your fraction rules, seeing a fraction in an equation makes it no different than any other one. I hope that makes sense. If you are still panicking as you watch this and you get to the end saying, oh my gosh, I still can't do it, just stop here, go back to the beginning and give it another try. You'll be okay. If not, go ahead on to your you-dos and I'll see you on the next one.